The world is on fire.
Black Lives Matter is ignored. Trans people have a lifespan of just 35 years. Neurodivergent people are still not accepted unless they assimilate.
Climate catastrophe is happening right now. The oceans are full of plastic, and the majority is from fishing lines. Biodiversity is going extinct every day. Farm workers still don't have fair rights. Indigenous people are still fighting to survive on their own stolen land.
Poverty, homelessness, and malnutrition are very real, even though there's enough food for all. Trillions of non-humans are slaughtered each and every year. Trillions each and every year.
The social justice issues that we face are innumerable, and they all intersect in ways most of us can't imagine unless we're wide awake. What can we do? Some argue that there's nothing to be done. Others pass the blame on capitalism, the top 1%, or consumerism. Do we really need to take individual actions, they say? Do we really need to? Should not be the question. Instead, we should ask why we haven't where we can, especially on behalf of those that cannot, often the most affected by our actions in the global north.
Our individual privileges are often unrecognized and ignored. Yes, most of us have them: classism, transphobia, homophobia, ageism, casteism, colorism, anti-blackness, anti-indigeneity, sexism, ableism, trickle down, and add up for an individual. White, cis, male, abled, and human reap the benefits that the rest of us do not. Often it is said that human and non-human rights are the same. This is not just because we are all animals under biological classification. It's because human and non-human rights intersect in ways that fuel one another under a world systematically decided by white supremacy.
White supremacy through colonialism successfully implemented hierarchies not just between the races they classified us into, but between humans and non-human animal species as well. This specific hierarchy between species made it possible to create a divide between our own communities and the natural world. Yes, mainstream white veganism is white supremacy. It is so because it fails to recognize how oppressions intersect. While mainstream veganism attempts to address human supremacy over all other species, it is a movement that still centers the point of view of the most privileged humans. Rather than uphold a stance that ensures accessibility and addresses root issues, which affect non-humans as well, it places non-humans on a hierarchy above marginalized people that face struggles and are kept oppressed by the same institutions that oppress non-human animals.
Single-issue vegans see speciesism as the most overriding oppression, as opposed to one of the many forms of oppression that are tied to capitalism, and mistakenly believe that being vegan absolves them of benefiting from speciesism and other kinds of systemic oppression. This reductive, individualist approach is often used to dismiss any form of accountability by white vegans in their role under capitalism, which is inherently white supremacist, patriarchal, and speciesist.
In essence, mainstream veganism has failed in its effort to ensure it does not exclude marginalized people and add to their oppression. As vegans of color, we propose something different. We challenge people of color to decenter whiteness completely from their point of view of veganism.
We would be remiss to ignore the fact that the same class of people who created and benefit from white supremacy and capitalism as we know it, and believe it to be inherently just and true, rather than a construct created by them, are the same class of people who created and benefit from the speciesism that many of us have come to accept as inherent truth.
As vegans of color, we reject veganism and any social justice movement that allows for any form of oppression to continue in our name. Racism, xenophobia, classism, homophobia, transphobia, ageism, ableism, anti-Semitism, anti-Blackness, Islamophobia, casteism, health shaming, body shaming, and any other form of ism does not have any place in a movement working towards justice.
Veganism of color extends beyond single issue activism and embraces a veganism that is consistent in anti oppression, one that is mindful about interconnecting oppressions, one that applies to us, the world's majority, and one that ensures we are aware of and working against specific forms of speciesism, including racialized speciesism and casteist speciesism, forced upon us in an effort to render us willing participants in our own oppression.
While it is not our place as vegans to tell people what to put in their bodies, ending racism and anti-Blackness means recognizing that the oppression of non-human animals is tied up in the oppression of Black people.
From the beginning of our colonisation in white-named Australia, the reality is that our oppression has always been interconnected with the oppression of non-human animals through our otherisation. Would it not make sense for those of us who have the ability to do so rise up and fight back against the white government by ensuring that we disconnect from non-human animal oppression and exploitation?
When we decenter whiteness and begin to understand how our oppressions are tied to non-human oppression, it becomes clear that we are unwilling victims caught under different systems of oppression under the same oppressor. Whiteness pins us against one another, which simply keeps the circle of supremacy alive.
Even though veganism is not inherently cruelty-free, non-veganism is tied to even more systems of oppression that disproportionately affect communities of color. A shift towards the rejection of non-human animal exploitation is a step towards ensuring that we also stand up for our own communities.
Rejecting animal agriculture means to recognize and take an active stance against the atrocities currently facing indigenous people in natural areas, such as the Amazon rainforest, as well as an ineffective food production system in which millions go hungry. A significant characteristic of capitalism is that it frames lives, bodies, and the things that those bodies produce as commodities. This phenomenon victimizes both humans and non-human animals, though of course not in the same ways. While people of color absolutely have our own struggles and fight towards our own liberation, we cannot ignore the fact that, even if you don't personally like or care about non-human animals, their exploitation does negatively impact human beings, especially people of color.
Once we draw the lines across different relationships that our society has forced between different castes and non-human animals, we can clearly see that Brahminism ideology, upheld through casteist speciesism, keeps the caste system intact through a dependency on oppression and exploitation of non-human animals.
As people of color, most of our histories are often tied to colonialism, which made large-scale exploitation of our resources, environment, and people acceptable through white supremacist ideology. Colonialism imported practices such as fur farming and livestock farming operations, among others.
A significant characteristic of capitalism is that it frames lives, bodies, and the things those bodies produce as commodities. This phenomenon victimizes both humans and non-human animals, though of course not in the same ways.
Paying attention to the intersections between human oppression and the oppression of other animals has also enabled me to rethink prominent social justice issues. Slaughterhouses in the US are an especially good example of this overlap. On one hand, these spaces are set up to destroy farmed individuals, but few people realize, on the other hand, that they are also racist, sexist, anti-worker, and anti-immigrant.
Fragmentation and hierarchy are interwoven so deeply in many of our beliefs that we often cease to see this connection. This belief system is weighing us down, pressing down upon us, oppressing us as living beings. It's too much.
I know what it means to be othered and animalized by white supremacist ideology. Along my journey, I came to the realization that the comparison of Black people to non-human animals was and is still used as a tool to divide us from them and make us into a lesser being. When we accept that our oppressors, white people, use this othering as a tool to keep us oppressed, it becomes clear that we must reject this tool for ourselves.
In addition, animal exploitation, animal oppression, is perpetuated by white supremacy, ableism, capitalism, colonization, and cis heteropatriarchy.
We cannot defeat oppressive systems without addressing justice for non-human animals, because their oppression is deeply entrenched in the systems that directly oppress human animals. Intersectionality, the theory coined by Kimberlé Crenshaw, provides us with a framework in understanding oppression. Racism, heterosexism, ableism, speciesism, and all other systems of marginalization are interconnected and work to reinforce one another mutually.
As a Black person, I am at the point in my journey where I can freely admit that other animals are not other to us. We are them and they are us. As Black people, we won't liberate ourselves by putting ourselves at the top and others at the bottom. In order to achieve Black liberation, we need different tools from the masters. We need not become master.
If we want to be part of a social justice movement that advocates consistent anti-oppression, we need to be willing to examine our own biases and privileges and ultimately advocate for our own surrender of them.
So here we are, we're asking you to join us in not just creating individual social justice movements, but a global movement devoted to consistent anti-oppression across the board.
We don't have to understand each other's struggles. We just have to acknowledge them, respect each other, and support one another in our commitment to disband all systems of oppression at the same time. Without doing this as a collective effort, none of us will achieve liberation.
We cannot live on this earth if we cannot coexist peacefully with its other inhabitants, whether it's people who are different from us or species that are different from our own.
I have witnessed that the future is most beautiful, most healing, most transformative when it reflects a commitment to co-liberation and rejects any notion that suggests that your body is mine to do as I please or your life matters less or not at all.
Even if non-human animal freedom is not at the forefront of your thoughts and action, minimizing your part in another species' suffering while reducing the money spent propping up animal agriculture and financing our oppressors can be done, alongside the fight for our own liberation.
This isn't just a call for you to go vegan. It's a request from people around the world to reject all systems of supremacy, including our own power over non-human animals. As to do this where we can, it's to take an active stance against white supremacy itself.
Even though veganism is not inherently cruelty-free, non-veganism is tied to even more systems of oppression that disproportionately affect communities of color. A shift towards the rejection of non-human animal exploitation is a step towards ensuring that we also stand up for our own communities.
Dear white vegans, we are each beneficiaries of white privilege. When we use analogies from human experiences of oppression only to advance issues for non-humans, we expose our ignorance of how oppressions are connected. We who are white have work to do. Doing the work includes self-reflection about the history of non-human oppression as it relates to racism and white settlers' role in perpetuating both human and non-human animal abuses, as well as recognizing our privileges over other marginalized groups. Doing the work means working for change in our own communities. When white vegans try to reach communities that are not ours, this is white supremacy in action. We make the work of vegans of color invisible, disrespecting them and their vision. Doing the work means consistently asking ourselves, who am I marginalizing? And spending time listening so that we can understand the world beyond our own experiences. It's time we truly centered non-humans in their own movement by stepping outside our comfort zone and learning about the injustices that we also have a hand in beyond speciesism. You can start with ConsistentAntiOppression.com.